It's been a while, so I figured I would release my updated top 12 running back rankings list for the 2021 fantasy football season. We're just about to mid-July at the time of recording and posting this video, so just keep that in context if you're watching this later down the line. We're obviously going to know some more information, most likely, whether there's injuries going on in camp or something breaks out and happens here. This is going to change from now until the peak of draft season. So here we go, mid-July running back rankings, my top 12 players, so my RB1s at the position for 2021 fantasy football. Make sure to head down, give this video a like, subscribe, and turn the bell on to the channel if you're new around here. Let's hit the intro and get right into things. Alrighty, we're going to start off in descending order here. So starting at the number 12 overall position and moving backwards, a player I would say I'm a bit more high on than the rest of the fantasy community at this moment in time is Najee Harris for the Pittsburgh Steelers, for the sole purpose that these rookie running backs, especially the ones with the draft capital invested into them by their new NFL teams, always seem to break out and hit late in the season. Najee for Pittsburgh, I don't expect to be any different. I love the floor that I think we're getting here because I expect the volume to be there with the Steelers, even in year one with a brand new football team. I think that the offensive line has been tossed out there, and I myself have talked about it in previous videos as for a reason to be concerned about Najee Harris's fantasy value for the 2021 season. But I think that with any offensive line, this is a new group coming in, and they invested some draft capital, not overly high draft capital, but some mid-round picks into that position. They went out and added Trey Turner, although they did lose David DeCastro, among some other names from that starting group in 2020. Nonetheless, this group is maybe going to get off to a slow start. Maybe Najee Harris has some not-so-hot performances in the first few weeks of the season, but it seems like everyone was able to put Jonathan Taylor's struggles behind him, forget about that, and put that in the past once he started winning fantasy leagues the last 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season last year. So as long as you can be patient, stick things out with Najee Harris here, I expect top-end production from a large physical back who produces and has the skill set to put up 3-down workhorse shares in this offense and to give us everything that we could hope for as fantasy owners of a running back that is honestly quite a steal in my opinion at his current ADP. Moving into this number 11 draft spot, I think the floor is a little bit more shaky and uncomfortable for J.K. Dobbins here, but if you like J.K. Dobbins in fantasy football, it has nothing to do with that floor. It's the ceiling that we're all here for, and that's the reason we're drafting him. He's actually a riser for me. I think a week or so back, or maybe 2 weeks now, I put out my top RB2 rankings list, and he was actually the number 1 RB2 I had in that video. Since I've reassessed the situation, broken down some more numbers and stuff that I like, and J.K. Dobbins has moved up 2 draft spots for me here in today's video. So now my RB11, a borderline fringe running back 1 prospect for me, with Lamar Jackson taking attention away from the defense and giving some more openings and holes for such an explosive player. I love the prospective draft pick and investment into a J.K. Dobbins because I think that of any player on this list, his upside, he can go toe-for-toe with just about anybody, and if he breaks off a couple runs in a game and finds the end zone like he did, he has a nose for the end zone. He got in there quite a bit last season despite not really starting many games. I think that he's got really, really great potential to exceed a lot of our expectations and finish even higher on this list if he's able to consistently meet that ceiling, which I think he's able to do. Into the RB10 spot now, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers is my next player up on the list here. He will remain a running back 1 for me regardless of Aaron Rodgers plays or not. I think there's pros and cons to each scenario. Obviously, the Packers will be passing the ball more if Aaron Rodgers is in this offense. If it's Jordan Love, we can probably expect them to lean more on Aaron Rodgers in the run game, although his efficiency might see a bit of a hit due to more predictability surrounding this offense. But nonetheless, Aaron Jones is a player I think that, I've got him ranked lower than he finished last year, but I expect his production and his volume to actually be improved from his 2020 performance and start to trend closer. He won't get to the heights that he did in 2019, but he will get closer to those numbers he had, or at least the volume. As long as he can be efficient, he has all the potential in the world here. But in 2020, he saw a bit of a hit. Jamal Williams was on the field for 40% of the Packers' offensive snaps, and I think he took away a lot of receiving volume that people weren't accounting for in Aaron Jones' fantasy value, and that was a big knock on his overall production and upside. So reclaiming some of that offensive production and that volume with Jamal Williams, now a Detroit Lion. I don't think A.J. Dillon infringes too much upon Jones's receiving work. There's a lot of extra room for growth that I think that people aren't factoring into Jones's fantasy situation, but there's a lot of great names on this list, so I had to put him down here at that number 10 overall spot. At number 9, I've got Cam Akers. This is a shift backwards by a couple, just because I can't ultimately sell myself too extreme on his floor, because being honest with myself, I got a bit excited. Cam Akers, the ceiling is super intriguing, it's super exciting, and it is right up there with some of the best players, as is, a lot of these guys have really, really great ceilings, but the floor made me move him back just a couple slots, because he did, while they weren't significant injuries, he was banged up a bit last season. Availability and consistency wasn't something that he has shown us over a large sample size in the NFL, although he was the workhorse back for this team down the stretch a year ago. I think that moving into this year, if you're going to take Cam Akers as a late first-round pick in a 12-team league, you can pencil that in as a major win for your fantasy roster, but I got a bit ahead of myself. Where I was seeing him be taken closer to the middle of the first round was a bit too much for my liking, so I bumped him back a spot or two here from last video, but I still think that he has all the potential in the world to be one of my favorite picks in the first round this season, and obviously one of the top running back finishers, as I think he has RB1 overall upside if he's able to suit up for the full 17-game schedule, which is unlikely, especially for a running back, but the potential is there for him to do great things. Zeke is another big riser for me, while Cam Akers and Cam Akers was really the first guy to slip down the list in today's video, but Zeke is a riser of a couple spots here in today's video. The reasoning is just the opposite of why I moved Cam Akers down the floor, is that I think that, or down the board here, is that I think Zeke's floor is a lot better than I was initially assessing and breaking down. You add in the receiving game, and I thought of that initially more as a ceiling thing, and while it has a major factor in, I think, producing a higher ceiling for Zeke, I think it also gives him major floor stability as well. This offense is going to feed him the rock. He's probably going to see roughly 20, 21 touches per game, whether it's on the ground or through the air. He's going to collectively see a very strong touch and workload in this Dallas offense. And we saw last year, even when the Cowboys were trailing, even when they didn't have the control of the lead in the fourth quarter, Dak was still finding Zeke out of the backfield and making smart check down decisions to him. So Prescott returns to the lineup this year. We've got him back and healthy. I think that bodes very well for Zeke, and I think that his fantasy stock should be rising right now, whereas I think that from the 2020 season and kind of the stinker that we saw from that Dallas offense with Garrett Gilbert and Ben DiNucci under center, Andy Dalton as well, obviously, I think that we are having too much PTSD from that ugly Dallas performance last year, when we need to be actually respecting Zeke and the fantasy potential that he still has for us this season. Jonathan Taylor is my next running back up on the board here. I think he's got very similar usage and play style to what a Zeke gives us here, but I think that the potential for explosive plays, the offensive line is at this point in its career better than the Cowboys' aging offensive line, which is frequently injured. I don't love the quarterback situation with Carson Wentz. I do fear that turnovers might factor into Jonathan Taylor's fantasy value if the Colts are frequently just giving the ball back to the opposing team and falling behind in games because they're not playing efficient football. Nonetheless, I got to believe in what Jonathan Taylor showed us last season. The numbers he put up down the stretch were amazing. He's probably got the easiest rushing defense schedule in the league in terms of in-division play. You get the Texans, the Titans, and the Jags twice a year. He's going to feast in those matchups. Again, running behind a pulling guard like Quentin Nelson is something you can't take lightly. And JT's a player who I think is very underrated as a pass catcher in this offense. And as a screen player last year with Phillip Rivers, he was very productive. And when he gets in space, he's got some pretty good track speed. So watch out for JT. His value's kind of been all over the place this year. He's been as high as like RB4 in the midst of the Saquon Barkley injury talk. And he's been as low as, I want to say, RB7 or 8 when we have gotten a little bit too high on him and then really quickly bailed on his fantasy value. So I think settling in on JT right around this RB6 or 7 range is perfect territory for him, depending on how you like him, how you factor in his risk and manage that situation. He's a player I still like as, a pick 7 or 8 in the first round of your fantasy drafts this year. Nick Chubb is a player I give a slight edge over a Jonathan Taylor despite not having quite as much workload in the receiving game. We obviously know at this point in his career, Nick Chubb is not known for receiving the football whatsoever in this Browns offense, but what Nick Chubb has been brought to light and known for in this offseason at least is the explosive plays and how just how good he is as a pure rusher. And he had 12 explosive plays, 4 behind Derrick Henry last season. Obviously missed some time though, so if you pace that out to a 16-game schedule, if he were to play the entire season, he would have been toe for toe with Derrick Henry, assuming that he would have maintained that level of production in those performances. And he was just one of the most consistent and dependable backs in fantasy. And you talk about the Browns offense, this is one of the very few teams that actually runs the ball a significant amount of times more than they pass it. They were 58% run to 42% pass last season. And for a very good roster that is going to be front running in the fourth quarter because their talent is just going to outperform other teams just in the nature of they got better guys matched up against other players on the football field. Nick Chubb's going to have the opportunity to run fourth quarters out. He's going to break away big runs late in football games because this team has such a good offensive line that when you talk about a pure rusher, the talent of Nick Chubb and the ability of Nick Chubb, he's going to get out there in space. He's going to break tackles, make defenders miss, find the end zone. This is a very good fantasy situation if you're a player looking for a safe running back one in the middle of the first round in any format of fantasy football in 2021. Nick Chubb's one of my favorite picks to make at that spot this year. Moving to the RB5 spot, I've got Derrick Henry. I'm quite a bit lower on Derrick Henry than I think a lot of people are. I've seen him as high as RB2 on other people's rankings. I'd say the most typical situation for him to fall is between the RB3 and 4 spots, but I've got him down here all the way at RB5. I'm sorry, I talked about it in yesterday's video, Alvin Kamara versus Derrick Henry, the ADP battle I did and broke down those two players. I just don't see how Derrick can get better this season than he was last year. He's had statistical improvement and progression each of his 5 NFL seasons, but when you talk about a guy who had nearly 2,150 yards from scrimmage last year, like in a player who doesn't have much involvement as a pass catcher, you're not really going to improve upon that. You can't get much better. 397 total touches is near that 400. Basically, we might as well just consider it a 400 touch season. Players don't come back the same from that. And Derrick Henry is an anomaly. He is a unique player in that we don't see guys this big, this fast, and this durable. But at some point, there has to be a breaking point and a threshold where you just simply can't get any better. He's had volume, yardage, and touchdown increases every single season he's been in the NFL. I think that starts to change and the trend starts to go the opposite direction from here. Again, no upside in the passing game. So if his efficiency drops, you're looking at decreased numbers this year, and that's just going to be the nature of the beast. This Titans offense also added a wide receiver 1 in Julio Jones, opposite of their already dominant franchise wide receiver 1, A.J. Brown. So this team might be passing just a touch more this year, and that might have more of an impact than you would think. So, Derrick Henry's inevitably probably still going to see 350 touches this year as a floor, but I would say that 375 is more of a realistic ceiling for him this year. 20 touches can still be a significant amount. Maybe he drops down 200-300, maybe even 400 if things go really south in the yardage department, and who knows? If he drops down to 14, 15 touchdowns, I mean, that's only a few touchdowns regression, and since he's the centerpiece of this offense, I'm not going to project him to jump off a cliff, but not someone I expect to improve, as I think his best days are already behind him, and he peaked in the 2020 season. Same thing goes for Alvin Kamara here, and I talked about him in yesterday's video as well. I think that the 2020 season rather was the best that we're going to get from Alvin Kamara. You talk about a guy who had a 6 touchdown performance against the Vikings, 21 total on the year. I mean, this is a guy who's been crazy efficient. He had the touchdown ceiling that was pretty much unmatched last year. And you lose Drew Brees, who might be one of the most valuable and underrated assets to another fantasy player that we're just kind of overlooking here, because Alvin Kamara does his damage through the air. That's where he has been the most productive as a fantasy football player throughout his NFL career. You talk about a guy who had under 300 touches last year, only 270 total of them. He's never ran the ball on the ground over 200 times in a given season. Derrick Henry almost doubled that on his own last year. And you talk about a player who's never had a 1,000-yard rushing season. And we talk about Alvin Kamara as maybe the best all-around running back weapon in the National Football League. It goes to show how balanced of a player he is, but also how important that receiving game is. So if Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill cannot replicate, and it's a pretty tall task to ask them to replicate Drew Brees' passing numbers for even just one player on this field, you're going to see a drop down. He will, again, not have a 6 touchdown game this season, so you're going to see touchdown regression. That's just kind of part of the deal here, and that's something that is really inconsistently translatable from season to season for any fantasy position. You talk about quarterbacks even are kind of all over the map and scattered at times in the touchdown department. So we're looking at regression here, but I think that the efficiency and the receiving value still gives him a slight edge over your Derrick Henrys of the world right here. My RB3, a player I am higher on in general than the rest of the fantasy community and a lot of other fantasy analysts out there, is Saquon Barkley. The simple fact here is that I think Saquon has a higher upside and a higher ceiling than any other player at this position. I love me some J.K. Dobbins. I love me some Cam Akers, and they're tremendously high ceilings. But Saquon hasn't even scratched the surface of what he can do. His best season collectively was like his rookie year, where he was just putting up these ridiculous explosive play numbers, and it was the closest he's been to playing a competitive and fully productive 16-game schedule. He's dealt with some various injuries that have slowed him down a bit, and the Giants have been, I've talked about this in my Saquon Barkley is a league-winning pick in the first round video. If you haven't watched that, you should go check that out. That's probably the deepest dive I've done into a singular individual player on the channel here. And I literally talked about Saquon for 20 minutes and how I expect him to recover strong and come back even better from this ACL injury. So I won't get into all of that information in today's video because this is supposed to be a quicker style format of an episode here. But again, go check that out if you haven't done so already. I can go link that in the description of this video, so be on the lookout for that. But Barkley, this is the best situation he's had with the Giants since he's been in the National Football League. They haven't had as many pass-catching weapons as they have this year. Their offensive line returns Nate Solder. They've got some draft picks coming in here. I think that with some development as well, their younger guys are going to take a step forward. So if Danny Dimes can be an average quarterback, I think this is a really good situation for Saquon that he hasn't yet had the luxury of experiencing. He's gotten Eli Manning in the late and miserable stages of his career. He's gotten an offense with no offensive line, no other offensive weapons, where teams are putting 8-9 guys in the box and just saying, okay, Saquon beat us, and he's done it at times. So if they spread things out even a little bit, if Barkley can get out in the open field, this is one of the most explosive players of my lifetime, and I don't think that there's another talent quite like him in the league. Absolutely, you're not going to have to take him at the number 3 spot in your draft boards either, which is fantastic. You can get him at the 5th spot on the board, which is RB5, literally, because ADP has it going McCaffrey, Cook, Henry, Kamara. So you're getting an incredible value here, the best upside in fantasy, in my opinion, this year, and a better floor than Saquon has ever had during his NFL career. So love Barkley at this RB3 spot, and I would not be surprised at all if he was an RB1 finish this year. Christian McCaffrey is my RB2, another player who the consensus is pretty much he's the RB1 this season, but he plays in a dang tough division. There are some legitimate run defenses in the NFC South. You talk about the Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I get it. That's only 4 games a year. Probably not enough to solely be the main factor of putting a Dalvin Cook, who obviously you'll see here in a second, ahead of him, because obviously McCaffrey is so dynamic as a receiving threat. But the injuries is something that isn't fair of me to completely base my fantasy analysis and projections for him this season based off of, but it's something I have to at least consider. And I will be the first to tell you, those injuries were not season-ending injuries. Well, essentially they kind of were, but they weren't of the significance that they were injuries that are going to impact him this season. It was more foreshadowing to me that we need to at least have some relative caution factored into CMC's draft stock this year. And I will, again, acknowledge Dalvin Cook was a player who definitely had the injury-prone tag slapped on his face for the first couple seasons of his career, and he's rebounded and bounced back nicely and maintained good health for the past couple seasons now. And McCaffrey absolutely has the opportunity to do so, and it's really, really dang close for me. But if I have the first overall pick on my draft board, I don't want, even if I have the slightest withdrawals and hesitation in making a pick, I don't want to draft that player, because I don't ultimately want to pick the player that I think is going to ruin things for me at the top of my draft boards. And that's not what I'm saying that McCaffrey's going to do. I'm not saying he's going to get injured and ruin your league, but it is a legitimate durability concern for me when I see a player injured in multiple locations that's holding him out of multiple games at a time. So it's just something that I factored into my overall rankings here that I've talked about with draft stock frequently throughout the channel in this offseason. So if you want to draft Christian McCaffrey first overall, I cannot fault you. I will not discredit that draft pick. But personally for me, Christian McCaffrey is the second running back on my draft board this fantasy season. And then we go Dalvin Cook here, obviously at that number 1 spot. Maybe his upside is just a touch lower than a Christian McCaffrey, but I think that his floor is also a touch better. So do you want to go floor or ceiling when the difference is very minuscule for that first overall pick? Again, I think you're going to get higher highs out of a CMC, but I think that you're also risking the potential based off of the 2020 campaign for lower lows. But any player can have injuries. Any player can have setbacks and deal with some nagging things that just kind of derail your season. So again, it's just so close for me. I'm not discrediting CMC in one bit here. I still absolutely love the pick, and if you were to fall to me at a 1.2 draft spot, I'd be ecstatic. So Dalvin Cook's got the NFC North. Again, divisional opponents aren't something to completely base your fantasy projections based around, but I do think that it's something that isn't talked about enough. You're getting 6 games per season out of in-division play. Just look at the AFC South. That is a gold mine for fantasy production. Even if you're the Houston Texans, you get the Titans secondary twice a year and the Jags secondary, which is very young, twice a year. You're giving yourself a chance, and it's just all a matter of perspective here. And there's going to be teams that have easier schedules than others, and that's something, again, we should be taking into consideration. Obviously, we tend to look at that a bit more in our week-to-week analysis when I'll do my weekly positional rankings here on the channel during the regular season, and I'll break down must starts and must sits based off of, every guy is going to have an incredibly tough matchup at least once this season. So, but in terms of Dalvin Cook, you get the Packers, the Lions, and the Bears. I would say the Bears are the toughest of that group, obviously, but the Packers and the Lions you could literally, my Packers, you can shred them like cheese. Like, their run defense is so poor that they literally line up outside linebackers and call them defensive ends and Zadarius Smith, and they'll put Preston Smith down there on the line. Like, we don't have true run-stopping defensive ends, so we just slap Kenny Clark out there in the middle of the defense. This is probably getting a bit away from fantasy football if you are not exactly familiar with the Packers or opposing NFL defenses. But the point being here is that Dalvin Cook has 4 games at minimum in his own division where he is going to run right through them, nearly beat the Packers, pretty much did beat the Packers by himself in 2020 once last season. So all around a workhorse. He was in the top 2 of most usage per game last season. He had 25.4 touches per game, I believe it was. So an incredible marker to be at. That's the volume. That's that floor we talked about. McCaffrey is just a tick behind him. That's the volume you want. You want your players to have the ball in their hands as often as possible. Dalvin Cook is the center of this Vikings run-first offense. That's what Mike Zimmer wants to do. He wants to keep the ball on the ground. They just drafted Christian Darrisaw. He's going to give Cook some big lanes to run off of the tackle with, and that's going to increase his upside as well when you talk about him breaking out into the open field, making defenders miss, and just doing what he does best. So there you go. Dalvin Cook, my RB1 for the 2021 fantasy season. Let me know down in the comment section below if you've got any differing opinions and if you've got any questions for me. Alrighty, you guys, once again, that was my top 12 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season as of mid-July 2021. Again, this is bound to change. These are highly subject to be fluid and move around. It says the same thing on my draft guide. If you go out and purchase that, when you open up the ranking sheet, it says these are fluid and often updated rankings. So that's how it's going to be. I mean, just about every week I'm moving players up and down and reassessing how I value current players, and we get new news and information all the time. So thank you so much for watching today's video. If you are new around here once again and you enjoyed today's content and what you're seeing from the SFS channel, make sure to go down and click that subscribe button. We'd love to have you become a part of the SFS community. Also, you got to join that Discord channel up as well. We would love to have you join that private chat room and be able to jump onto Mock Draft Monday with myself and Eric when we go out and record videos and have subscribers featured in our videos once a week. So that'd be awesome for you to take advantage of. We'd love to have you stick around here for the 2021 fantasy season and beyond. And with that being said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.